Intellectuals do. Intellectuals do. With James Kirklin.
Powerful and provocative. Prophetic and practical.
Have you ever found yourself?
Are you dating for that person?
Informative and
I feel
inspirational.
every bit of that. Like, I'm not trying to waste my
How
time.
you gonna do better if you don't know what better looks like? I do.
Intellectuals do.
Come on, let's talk about it with me, the mind massager.
Intellectuals.
All right. Let's get this thing started. I am so excited today to have with me one of the most well-renowned pastors in the country, very well-known, very theologically sound, very gifted, Pastor Clinton McFarland. And I am doing a series called Understanding Your Calling, where I'm interviewing several different pastors. And I reached out to this brother, and he automatically consented, didn't give me any pushback, didn't even really ask any questions. He just said I would be honored. And without any further ado, let me introduce to some and present to others, Bishop, my friend, Pastor Clinton McFarland. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing absolutely wonderful. How are you today?
Man, I'm making it on broken pieces, but I'm gonna hold on to the ship. I'm gonna hold
Praise
on
God.
as long as the wood floats. I'm gonna hold on to the ship, man.
Well, thank God for pieces.
Thank God for pieces, and thank God for gopher. I think it was called gopher wood, but I thank God for that type of wood.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, sir. Man, I appreciate you for consenting to come on to this. I'm calling these segments the calling beyond the chair, because what I'm doing is I'm allowing people to get to know the pastor beyond social media, beyond what they view. Some of them view as untouchable, but they don't understand that all of it starts with a calling. All of it starts with a calling. And I reached out to you and I told you what I was doing, and you said, "Man, it'd be my honor, and I appreciate you." And I want to tell you publicly that I do thank you for consenting to come on today.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be a part of it, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think that there are so many areas of ministry that we need to explore, and I consider this to be another area of ministry and an opportunity to disseminate the gospel, but do it in a different way.
Absolutely, but man, I appreciate that. So let's get into it, man. I told you off air how we dealt with different types of callings on one of my segments, the direct call, progressive call. And, these are the calls. I'm sure there are others, but this is Kirklin 101. It's the direct call, circumstantial call, and a call through others. And I've talked to people who've had different facets of their calls. I had Bishop Godby on earlier this week. And he talked about how he was called at 5, but he was rejected by the church. So he rebelled, but then he was converted at 19. And then he reconnected with that call, and that calling became confirmed. So let's go back into your history. How old were you when you were called to preach?
Well, I was 16 years old when I first felt the call of God. To preach the gospel. In fact, mine was somewhat strange because I got saved and experienced the call the same night.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And although I did not yield to the call at that time, but that's the first time I knew definitively, without a doubt, that preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ is what God wanted me to do.
Okay, let's talk about that. So you said you got saved and you got called the same night. What was your experience with church, with Christ, prior to 1 through 15? What did that look like?
Well, I was raised in the church. In fact, I was in the church before I was born in my mother's womb. My father was my pastor. And so I was in the church, a part of the church, played music. In the church. I was in the choir, was minister of music, whatever you want to call it at that time. And I certainly had a zeal of God. I knew the stories, the biblical stories, and I knew about church, and I was baptized at the age of 8.
Oh, wow.
So I had all of that, but I'm talking about a real desire to give my life to Christ. Did not occur until I was 16, and it was not even at my home church. My father was conducting revival, and I was his musician, so I traveled with him, and he was in Boston, Massachusetts. And I was hanging with the young people, especially the girls. I liked the girls. And so there were pretty girls. So we all hanging out, and the guys and girls hanging out, but they were different.
Okay.
They had a certain seriousness, sincerity about them. And I had not really been exposed to that in my rural context. Children were children.
Okay.
In my rural context, but though they were teenagers, they had a real sincerity about Christianity and about serving God. And by that Thursday night, I remember saying to God, whatever they have, I want it.
Oh, wow.
And it was that night I yielded my life to Christ. And at that moment, it is when I first felt the urge to preach the gospel, and I had never felt that before.
So you felt the urge to preach the gospel. Did you? Because the transformation takes place. Your environment. I tell people all the time. I think limited environment, limited effects. Limited exposure. You kind of limit yourself, but as you expose yourself to new things, new people, and sometimes God. And if we believe in the providential will of God, He just navigates us and puts us in the places that we need to be to promote us where He needs to promote us to. Right. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Most certainly, my environment served as a catalyst to stir something. I think it's always been in me. In fact, after I finally yielded to the call, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at the age of 23, 22, turning 23, it was then that my mother told me that she was not surprised because God told her that I was going to preach the gospel when I was in her womb. So it was in me. God used the people that I was around at that time to sort of stir it. That drive or that desire or that urge, I should say.
Gotcha. And that's interesting. Okay, so you're 16, you get the urge to preach, and you're not unfamiliar with the things of God and preaching because your father's a pastor. So you have this urge. Does your father know at that time, or is it something that you're sitting with secretly?
I kept it to myself. I never said it. I never shared it with anybody at that time. Okay.
So what does 16 through 22 look like?
Well, 16 through 22. Well, let's go from 18 to 22. 16, 18, I'm still in school, in high school. And of course, I had to conform to whatever my father's rules were. So I stayed in church. However, I had another plan for my life. I was a gifted singer and preaching the furthest thing from my mind. My father was a preacher. My brother was a preacher pastor. My uncle was a preacher, and preaching was the furthest thing from my mind. In that rural context, all preachers I knew were, I won't say broke, but they didn't make a lot of money. And so I've got this gift to sing. So I want to hone my gift in the church, but then my plan was to transition into secular music. And so from 16 to 18, because I sort of rejected that call, though I felt it. Okay. And I knew it, but God, I have other plans.
Gotcha.
So from 16 to 18, I stayed in church, but at 18, in pursuit of my dream and my desire, I started playing and singing with a gospel group who was up and coming
Okay.
And I thought that, of course, this would introduce me to people. I will transition to secular and all of that. So from that time, from about 18 to 21, I really was not in church.
Okay.
Unless it was a concert. We were singing Sunday morning. We're in the hotel, sleep. Sunday evening, we go do the concert, and we were traveling. So I was traveling quite extensively, and I was in hot pursuit of my dream. So that's from 18 to 21, sort of like the prodigal son, very riotous, wasteful. And at 21, I repented of my sins. I was living away from Mississippi, which is my native state, and I was in Ohio.
Okay.
And my mother called me one night out of the blue and said, "Son, you need to come home." Well, this is before cell phones. This is before social media. Certainly, she does not know what I'm doing, here. So the next night, I called my mom to tell her I wasn't coming home. Before I could get it out, she said, "Your daddy said you need to come home."
Oh, wow.
And so once she said that, I knew my father never interfered in our lives after becoming adults. And so it was then I packed up my stuff and I went back to Mississippi. And when I hit the state line, it was then that I said to God, "Listen, I know this is not the life I'm supposed to be living," because even through the period of 18 to 21, God never left me alone. I could be in the club. I went to the club for the first time at 21 for my birthday. And I'm in the club and everybody's having a good time but me. God is telling me, "You know what I called you to do. This is not you. You know what I want you to do." And of course, I take a drink trying to mask whatever it is, or sedate, so to speak, this urge. And as much as I was drinking, I never could get intoxicated. And so just all the time speaking to me. And it was like, I hope this illustration is not too derogatory. It is like when you first have to go to the restroom, it might just be a light urge. But if you don't go, it becomes more intense.
Yes.
And that's the way it was with me. At 16, it was just a light urge, but then 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and finally it just got to the point where you can hold it all you want to, but when it's time to go, you got to go.
And it's coming out. And it's coming out. It's coming out. And that's the part. This is really where I wanted to get to, because we've been arguing this concept, that the calling typically comes before the conversion, right? Because the conversion is there. Romans 11:29 says the gifts and calling of God are without repentance. Once God has put that light on you, it has to happen. And we can, and the thing I like about it, Augustine said, God has made us for himself and our hearts are restless until it finds its rest in him, right? So he puts this restlessness in our spirit. You know what I'm saying? Because this is it, Pastor McFarland. This is your interview, so I'm not going to do too much talking. I'm sorry. No, but it's interesting how God creates us with a need, but then he's the only one that's able to satisfy that need.
Yes. And that need is there to draw us back to him. Exactly. It is a need. It is a yearning that nothing else can fill.
Yeah.
And he placed it there to draw us to him. And that's what I had to discover. I thought I could feel it in other ways. I even bargained with God to the point where I said, "Well, God, I tell you what, let me do what I'm doing. Let me get into this secular business. And what I'll do when I turn 30, I will have made enough money. I'll quit and I'll preach the gospel for free." And I even said, "You let Al Green do it." He did it. And God spoke to me just as plain as I'm talking to you and said, "The way you're going, you'll be dead by 30. Yeah. Because really around some guys that had, had started doing the drugs, and then some of the guys got into the crack cocaine. I didn't try that, but had my mama not called me.
Wow.
So it all worked together. That's why I can't pat myself on the back for anything. It's like everything was orchestrated by God. And, I just had to yield to what he wanted. But I would have been a crack addict had I not been removed from that environment.
So a couple things, people who are listening right now. One thing is God still speaks, and he speaks audibly. Pastor McFarland has said on several occasions, first he said he had an urge to preach, but 18 through 21, he started hearing God's voice more. And that's what God does, especially when we go to the quote unquote far countries of life. So the gift and calling of God is without repentance. You can't run from it. You can't get away from it. So he said, and he knew that he was living a life that was contrary, because he said when he hit Mississippi State line, he started repenting. So you repented at Mississippi State line. By the time you got home, what happened?
Well, I was 21 at that time. I returned home, 21, almost 22. And though I repented, I got back in church, which is something that I was not doing. I still didn't plan on preaching.
Okay.
It was just not something, man, I don't understand it. It was just not something I wanted to do. And so I still didn't plan on preaching. So I'm in church, I'm singing, I'm minister of music again, I'm playing the piano, the organ, and I feel like I'm satisfying God. I'm God, okay, look at what I'm doing. I mean, I'm doing good, I'm paying my tithes, and God just still would not leave me alone. And it became so intense until I found myself preaching to myself.
Okay.
And it is at that point where I started mentioning it to other people.
Okay.
I never did mention it to my father until I yielded. But then I started mentioning it to other people. I mentioned it to the girl I was dating. Okay, what if I was a preacher, such and such. And I found myself preaching in my automobile. I loved preaching. I loved hearing it. And I found myself preaching to myself in my automobile. And when I knew I was really about crazy, because I think it was driving me crazy, and I will say, you can run from God. You just will not be sane. You're going. It runs you crazy.
I stand corrected. You're right. You are right.
But you'll be crazy if you keep running, because it was literally driving me crazy to the point where we would have choir rehearsal on Saturday at 4:00. I would go to the church when nobody was there at like 2, get in the pulpit, and just start preaching sermons. Just me, nobody but me. And I was having to get it out of me. And, it was just a fire in my bones.
Listen, young preachers, y'all need to listen to this. Y'all, this is not, his preaching is not emanated in desire. It was not, he was not trying to get status or position. And that's why God blesses it. Because of everything starts with the origin. You can't get to glory without a story, right? So your story, your 16 through 21, do you think that prepared you for accepting your call to preach?
I think it did, because once I accepted the call to this day, and that's been over 34 years ago, I've never doubted it. I've never doubted it. Not one time, not 1 second have I ever doubted the call. And so I think it was because of the fact that I was running away from the call. I wasn't really trying to run away from God, but God was connected to the call. And so I was trying. So if I got to run away from God, okay, anything to get away from this,
From the
because and I don't know why, Doc, I don't know why I didn't want to preach. Just something I didn't want to do.
Do you think it was a responsibility that came? Because some people don't want to abuse influence. You know, some people that go ahead.
Yeah, well, I knew areas of my life that were not godly.
Okay.
And I've always been the kind of person, if I'm going to do something, I felt that I had to be right, so to speak.
That's good.
That was one thing. I mean, and God, I know me, I got to live with me.
Yeah.
And I never shall forget, even after being called to preach and accepting the call and pastoring years later, and went through some struggles, some areas of struggles. And I said to God, God, here I am a preacher and I'm struggling in this area. God said, I knew everything about you before I even called you. I called you despite you, not because of you, but despite who you are. And I can use you just as you are. So my thing was, and my father and all of the preachers that I was around presented themselves as almost walking on water.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I know they had areas of weakness as well, but they didn't let us see it.
That's good stuff.
And I held preachers and preaching in high regard.
Yes.
I didn't know some of the stuff that takes place behind the veil, until I became a preacher. But they didn't let me know certain things, and I knew I was not there yet. So I felt that God couldn't use me. That was one reason. And number two, secondly, I just had a dream of something that I wanted to do.
Yes. All right. So we're almost done. I know I told you I wasn't gonna hold you long, and I appreciate you. I'm gonna ask two more questions. This first one's gonna have a couple of parts to it. Because you talk about your father and your uncles and all of those around you who were preachers. So those, I'm sure, were mentors. And growing up in the church and being able to play that organ, and I'm sure you've met, especially in Mississippi, because Mississippi has the world's greatest preachers. They can be preaching to 6 people in the field, and they still killing it. So I know the exposure you must have had during that time. Did they see it on you? Was it okay?
They did.
Okay.
Everybody saw it but me. Which I saw it, but I just was not wanting to see it. People would tell me all the time. I never will forget when I was singing with this group. I don't know if you are old enough to remember this quartet singer who was so popular back in the day, Willie Banks.
I'm 52 years old, sir. Yes, I know Willie Banks and the Messengers.
Willie Banks and the Messengers.
Yes, sir.
So we were touring. My group was touring with him.
Okay.
And I was a young, impressionable guy at that time. And I was trying to keep up with the other guys, do what they do, talk like they talk. He pulled me to the side. He said, "Young man, you're different." Now I was about 19 at that time. He said, "You're different." He said, "You don't fit."
You don't fit.
I thought it was an insult at first. He said, "You don't fit." I said, "Well, what do you mean, Mr. Banks?" He said, "There is something on your life that you're trying to act just like everybody else, but you just don't fit." So everybody saw it, and the fact, rather, I should say, how I was moved to accept my call.
Yes, sir.
At 22, it was in July of 1990. I was turning 23 in August, so right in between that time. I never shall forget, it was after the second Sunday in July. It was revival meeting at the Green Hill Baptist Church, Shabuta, Mississippi. That was my father's church. I was a musician. And so that Monday night, I knew the preacher He was a quartet singer and a preacher, but I didn't get to shake his hand. Country church, people everywhere, crowded. Tuesday night, I went up to shake his hand, and he said to me, "Man, I want to talk to you."
Yes, sir.
So I'm thinking he's a quartet singer. I'm a studio musician as well. He may want me to do some work for him. So I stayed after church. And when when he started talking to me, he said, "I don't normally do this. I don't claim to be a prophet or anything like that. But the Lord showed me that you're caught between two opinions.
Mm.
And God told me to tell you, whatever he's called you to do, go on and do it." Now, I've not seen this guy in like 5 years because I've been away. I've not said anything, but God spoke to him. He spoke to me. And it was at that moment that I broke down and I said, "I know exactly what you're talking about." And at that moment, I said, "God, I yield." And so I left church, went by my father, stopped by my father's house, and I told him, and he broke down, and my mom broke down. And my dad just said to me, "I was just wondering how long was it going to take?"
Why do you think they broke down?
They knew it, and they knew I was running, but my father told me I never would say anything to you because I did not want to influence you in any way. But I was wondering how long was it going to take for you to yield?
Jesus.
Yeah.
Man, this has been a powerful interview so far. We're gonna close. We're gonna segue out on here. What lessons have you learned from your early ministry that continue to guide how you lead and serve today? And out of those lessons, what would you say to young people, not just struggling with a call to preach, but just struggling with a call, period? What would you say to them?
Learn to hear, learn to listen, to be in tune to the voice of God, and realize that God knows more about you than you know about yourself. And true happiness, true success is in yielding to God's will for your life. Had I done what I wanted to do, I don't think I could have been as happy. I'm happy doing what I do. I can't think of anything else that I want to do other than ministry, preaching, teaching, motivating people.
Yes, sir.
So that's the lesson I would share with any young person, any young preacher, pastor, or person. And then secondly, be sincere.
Yes.
This is not a game. It's not a game. This is a divine call, and treat it like that. I'm not a perfect guy, never claimed to be. But one thing I've tried to do is preach a pure gospel. And I believe that the miracle of the gospel is that God is able to take a pure gospel and filter it through an imperfect conduit. That gospel comes out pure. I think it's because of the sincerity of my heart. I love God. I love God's people, and I always want to handle them in a godly way. So that's the advice that I would give to any person.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. You got tears in my eyes over here, so don't tell nobody I'm crying. But it's good. Man,
Between us.
I kept you for 29 minutes and 10 seconds so far. I appreciate you, man. Let me. I'm gonna end this. Hey, listen, you all. I'm going to be bringing more pastors to you all. I want to hear their stories. And this one is going to be a good one. And because you all have seen the man, but now you see the matter and the meaning, that made the makeup of who this McFarland. I'm putting all these M's in here. I might as well alliterate it myself. So that's it, man. Hold on one second. I appreciate you for that.
Thank you, man. Thank you.